During the 1990s, he was one of the most popular action stars in the world. His helicopter kick and his ability to work himself doing the splits into essentially any movie were his trademarks, as he'd deliver some iconic action movies. But like everybody else, he would also deliver some movies that many would say are iconic for the wrong reasons. So let's get into it as I dive into the filmography of Jean-Claude Van Damme in this episode of 3 Best and 3 Worst. What's going on out there, everybody? Thank you as always for stopping by the channel. I'm Anthony DeJoya, and this is Movies Never Say Die, your one-stop shop for 80s and 90s retro reviews. And today, I'm diving into the filmography of Jean-Claude Van Damme. Now, I grew up loving Van Damme. I've been revisiting a lot of his major films recently, so for this list, I'm going to focus on his starring roles in theatrical releases, so his many straight-to-video action flicks won't count for this video. So let's get this list going with my number 3 pick for his worst film, a movie that actually was a financial success but was heavily panned by critics, the video game adaptation of Street Fighter from 1994, where Van Damme would take on the lead role of Colonel Guile. Now, this movie actually made over $99.4 million, but even as a huge Van Damme fan as a kid growing up, I didn't like this movie at all. It's gained a little bit of nostalgia over the years, but it still isn't a good movie, and to be honest, the action overall is just kind of crappy. It's overly serious in places, it's over ridiculous during others, the performance from Van Damme feels uninspired, and he isn't even really in the movie that much. Van Damme overall, I guess you could say, delivers a bland performance in this movie, and he was severely outshined by Raul Julia, who seemed to know exactly what this movie was trying to be. Countering this film is my pick for his number 3 best movie, and to me that would be when Van Damme co-starred alongside himself as twin brothers who avenged the murder of their parents in the action classic Double Impact from 1991. I probably wore my VHS tape out as a kid watching this movie so many times. It's super cheesy, but it's also a well-structured action movie when you look at it. I think Van Damme really gets to shine as he brings a dual personality to this pair of brothers. He also switches up the fighting style, with one being more gritty and the other being more finesse, and this really does result in a collection of killer action sequences for this movie, with martial arts legend Bolo Yeung providing it a solid heavy. Van Damme is at peak cool, he's at peak cheese, and this movie as a whole is just able to feel larger in scope than, say, Bloodsport or Kickboxer because of its larger budget. Now, my next movie sadly only had one Van Damme in it, and it's my pick for his number 2 worst movie, and for that one I have 1997's Double Team, where Van Damme would star alongside NBA star Dennis Rodman in a movie that I would just sum up as being a complete mess. This movie was a big financial failure for Van Damme. It was one of those films that were on the downward slope of his theatrical run, and like I said, it's essentially a complete mess from top to bottom. First off, the action isn't that well shot, it's not well choreographed, none of it feels very intense, and then you get Dennis Rodman, who is horrible. Now, he wasn't given the best dialogue, yet he still manages to make it even more cringe while also capturing no chemistry with Van Damme. The plot is nonsensical and it's sort of just a sad movie, but I will contend that it's one of those movies that manages to bring just enough absurdity to kind of hover close to the so bad it's good club, because this is definitely a movie you can laugh at while watching. Switching back over to the good side, I have my number 2 pick for his best movie, and I have Universal Soldier from 1992, where Van Damme would star with Dolph Lundgren as dead soldiers brought back to life to be super soldiers, and if that doesn't sound like a perfect recipe for awesome 90s action, then nothing does. And I think this movie delivers a bit of it all for the time period in this genre. It has an amusing high-concept plot, it has a mix of small and large-scale action sequences, and Dolph Lundgren absolutely shines as a sadistic Unisol gone rogue. The movie has a very capable budget. You can see the budget when watching, and with a reliance on the practical stunt work and Van Damme and Lundgren front and center commanding the screen, this blend of action movie tropes still manages to result in an entertaining ride of just violent, fun action, complete with a textbook action movie showdown to really close everything out with satisfying results. Now, over his career, Van Damme would pass up the opportunity to do a lot of sequels to his movies. Unfortunately, though, he did decide to do a sequel to this film. It would also be his last theatrically released film, and it's my number 1 pick for his worst, 1999's Universal Soldier: The Return, as the Universal Soldiers return to fight a supercomputer built inside of another super soldier. Now, I think many of you guys would agree that the main job of a sequel is to do what worked in the first film bigger and with much more gusto. Hopefully they can also build onto the character arcs and take things to a few new places as well. Universal Soldier: The Return does, I guess, go to a few new places. However, it just feels like a parody of a Universal Soldier movie instead of a true sequel. This film feels like such a gimmicky, sanitized, straight-to-video action flick. Van Damme is essentially playing himself instead of the character, and with cheesy additions like Goldberg and uninspired performances and boring action and just poor writing, this easily is Van Damme's worst major film. And to close this list out on a high note, my pick for his #1 best movie, I have the time-traveling action-adventure Time Cop from 1994, where Van Damme plays a security officer who regulates time travel that will battle a dirty politician who's changing the past in order to control the future. I really do enjoy this movie. I just rewatched it and it really had me locked in. I think the blend of action movie with time travel really works to give Van Damme plenty of time to do what he does best and ham up the screen. The plot progression has a steady pace to it, and it doesn't just rely on Van Damme's trademarks, which I think really does give the action a variety with both your textbook fight sequences and bigger, larger set pieces. The story surely is a bit silly, but it's also a sturdy backbone to all the adventure, and it's actually sort of unique, which is fun. Time travel movies can often get a little bit messy, but this one doesn't, which I think makes watching Van Damme deliver one of his better performances while traveling through time with a mullet a lot of fun. And that's it for this list, guys. My picks for Jean-Claude Van Damme's best and worst 3 movies. Let me know what your picks would be down in the comments. I'd love to see your guys' takes on topics like these. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. It's greatly appreciated. And until the next video, movies never say die.
This is Jack Burton in the Pork Chop Express, and I'm talking to whoever's listening out there.
Survive a war, you gotta become war.
I suppose we have to register you as a lethal weapon.
You trying to say Jesus Christ can't hit a curveball?